I'm Elias, 15, a male, and my golden sister got pregnant at 13, so my parents forced me to wear a fake. The sentence itself is a lie, but it's the truth of my life, a truth so dark and twisted that it has haunted me for a decade. My sister, Isabella, was 2 years younger than me, but 1,000 times more important in the eyes of my parents, Richard and Martha. She was the family's radiant star, a graceful dancer and a talented artist who never seemed to make a mistake. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, studious one, the one who never caused a problem. I was the reliable backdrop against which Isabella's brilliant, beautiful life was painted. I remember a time when I was 10 and had won a scholarship to a summer science camp. I had worked incredibly hard for it, studying every night and acing every test. When I brought the news home, my parents gave me a quick nod. "That's great, Elias," my mom said, her eyes still on a photo of Isabella winning a dance competition. Later that same day, Isabella came home crying because she had lost her ballet slipper. The rest of the evening was spent consoling her, searching the house for the missing slipper, and telling her she was the most talented dancer they had ever seen. My scholarship letter lay forgotten on the kitchen counter, a silent testament to the unequal distribution of their attention. This was the long-standing dynamic in our family. My achievements were expected and overlooked. Isabella's needs were paramount. So when Isabella, at 13, came home one evening with her head bowed and tears streaming down her face, I knew something big was about to happen. She was a child, still in middle school, but she had been spending a lot of time with a boy from her dance class. She was a month away from her 14th birthday, and her life was a series of small, dramatic crises that my parents, in their frantic need to protect her, always solved. My parents, their faces etched with a familiar mixture of concern and a barely concealed panic, sat her down. I watched from the hallway, a fly on the wall, as they talked in hushed, worried tones. The topic of the conversation became clear when I heard my mom say, "Isabella, you're going to have a baby." The news was a bomb in our quiet suburban home, but it was a bomb that only created collateral damage in my corner of the house. Isabella, the golden child, was pregnant at 13. My parents, in their frantic need to protect her and their perfect family image, came up with a plan so twisted and so cruel that it still makes me feel sick to my stomach. They decided to hide the pregnancy. Isabella would spend her summer at a special summer camp, and when she came back, she would be homeschooled for the rest of the year. They reasoned, was 15 and a boy, and could handle the emotional burden of their lie. They would tell everyone that I was the one who was going to have a baby, and Isabella was my supportive younger sister. The fake was a prosthetic pregnancy belly that I was to wear in public, to school, to all of our family functions. It was a lie so intricate and so bizarre that it still shocks me to this day. It was the final, devastating act of a lifetime of favoritism, and it was a wound that I knew would never truly heal. My parents, in their frantic effort to keep Isabella from falling apart, had willingly pushed me over the edge. The summer was a blur of misery and deception. Isabella was sent away to a secluded home for young mothers, a place my parents referred to as that special camp. My life, meanwhile, became a carefully constructed performance. My parents took me to a boutique to be fitted for the prosthetic pregnancy belly. The woman who helped us was kind, and she thought it was for a school play. My parents, masters of the lie, played along. As she measured my waist, she said, "Oh, you're going to be a wonderful actor. You're so good at acting the part of a boy." The words, meant as a compliment, felt like a cruel joke. I was a boy, and I was being forced to act the part of a pregnant teenager. The lie grew to an unimaginable scale. My parents told all of our relatives that I was the one who had gotten into trouble. They had a story prepared, a tear-filled, sob-inducing tale of a young boy led astray by an older, irresponsible girl. I was to play the part of the distraught, but ultimately responsible, parent-to-be. Isabella was to play the part of the supportive younger sister, the one who was there for me through thick and thin. The phone calls, the family dinners, the trips to the grocery store, all of it was a performance. I would walk into a room, my stomach swollen with a lie, and the pitying glances of my relatives would hit me like physical blows. My parents, on the other hand, would look at me with a cold, almost detached expression. The lie, they reasoned, was for the family's greater good. The damage it was doing to me was simply collateral. My parents were so good at this lie that they started to believe it themselves. I was no longer their son, I was the problem. Isabella was no longer their irresponsible daughter, she was the brave, supportive sister. My entire identity was erased, replaced by a lie so profound that I started to lose myself in it. I would look in the mirror and see not myself, but a boy with a pregnant belly, a stranger I had been forced to become. The physical burden of the fake belly was nothing compared to the emotional weight of the lie. I was an emotional prisoner, locked in a cage of my parents' making, with no hope of escape. I was a boy who had been stripped of his identity and his future, all to save the reputation of a sister who was nowhere to be found. The silence from Isabella was all the confirmation I needed that she was complicit in this lie. She never called, never wrote, never once asked how I was doing. She was safe, away from the public shame and scrutiny, while I was forced to shoulder the burden of her mistake. I had once loved my sister fiercely, but that love had been replaced by a cold, hard resentment. She was the reason for all of this, and she was the one who was getting away with it. The lie, which had started as a way to save her, was now a weapon that was slowly, but surely, destroying me. The day the baby was born was a blur of chaos and deceit. Isabella, having returned home a month earlier, was now a home-schooled student with a brand-new baby nephew. My parents, meanwhile, were celebrating the birth of their grandson. The lie had now taken on a life of its own, a new person, a new identity, a new tragedy. The baby, a beautiful, innocent boy, was named Leo. My parents, in their twisted logic, had decided that I was to be his mother. I was to take care of him, to raise him to be the parent he deserved. The new lie was even more suffocating than the old one. I was no longer just a boy with a fake pregnant belly. I was a boy who was now a father. I was a parent to a child who wasn't mine, a child who was the living, breathing embodiment of my family's deceit. I would walk around with Leo in a baby carrier, and the pitying glances of my family would hit me like physical blows. My parents, on the other hand, would look at me with a new kind of pride, a pride that was born of a lie. "He's such a good father," my mom would say to our relatives, her voice filled with a fake, but convincing, admiration. Isabella, meanwhile, was living her life as if nothing had happened. She was a social butterfly, a popular student who had her own phone, her own car, and her own friends. She would occasionally play with Leo, a brief, impersonal gesture that was meant to show her support for her brother. She was the one who had gotten pregnant, but I was the one who was a parent. She was the one who had made the mistake, but I was the one who was paying the price. My love for my sister had been replaced by a deep, seated hatred, a hatred that I knew would never truly go away. The lie consumed my life. I dropped out of school, my dreams of a future in architecture now a distant, faded memory. I spent my days taking care of Leo, a child who was both my salvation and my torment. He was a sweet, innocent boy, and I found myself drawn to him, to his innocence, to his need for love and support. I was a father to a child who wasn't mine, but I was also the only person in his life who loved him without conditions. The irony was not lost on me. I, the boy who had been discarded by his family, was now the only person in his life who was a true, honest parent. The years passed, and Leo grew into a beautiful, intelligent boy. I was his father, his teacher, his mentor. I taught him how to read, how to draw, how to build things with his hands. I poured all the love and support that I had been denied into him, a quiet act of rebellion against a family that had so profoundly betrayed me. The lie, which had once been a source of my torment, was now a source of my strength. I was a father, and I was going to be the best father I could be, for a child who was a victim of my family's deceit, just like me. 10 years. A decade had passed since the day my life was stolen from me. I was now 25, a successful architect with my own design firm. Leo was 10, a brilliant, beautiful boy who was the light of my life. My parents, Richard and Martha, had long since moved on, their memories of the Lee. Now a faded, distant dream. Isabella, my supportive younger sister, was a social media influencer, her life a series of curated posts and shallow friendships. The lie, which had started as a way to protect her, was now a lie that had become her reality. She was a mother, but she wasn't a parent. She was the one who had gotten pregnant, but she had never once taken responsibility for her actions. She was the golden child, and I was the one who had been forced to wear her shame. My life with Leo was a quiet act of defiance. We were a family, a small, independent unit that had been forged in the fire of my family's deceit. I had built a life so successful and so independent that they would never be able to touch me again. I had become the person I had always wanted to be, a person who was proud of his accomplishments, not for the sake of his parents, but for the sake of himself and his son. The lie, which had once been a source of my torment, was now a source of my strength. I had taken a lie and turned it into a truth. I was Leo's father, his protector, his role model. I was the parent he deserved, the parent my family had denied him. I was a man who had been stripped of his identity and his future. But in doing so, I had found a new, more profound sense of self. The call came on a cold winter evening. It was my mother. Her voice, once full of a frantic energy, was now tired and broken. "Elias," she started, her voice a whisper. "We need your help." My heart, which had been so carefully guarded for a decade, ached with a strange mixture of pity and resentment. "Your father. He's in the hospital. It's serious." The call was not a heartfelt plea for reconciliation. It was a desperate plea from a broken family. The lie they had so desperately tried to protect was now a lie that had destroyed them. The truth, which had been hidden for a decade, was now a truth that was about to be revealed. I was a boy who had been forced to wear a lie that had become my reality. And now, a decade later, I was a man who was about to reveal that lie to the world. I was no longer a victim, I was a survivor, and I was about to confront the family that had so profoundly betrayed me. The journey home was not a return, it was a reckoning. The drive back to my hometown was filled with a sense of dread and anticipation. I was a different person, a successful man with a beautiful life. But the old feelings of hurt and resentment still lingered. A ghost in my heart. I pulled into the driveway of the house I had once called home. The front yard was unkempt, the paint on the house was peeling, and a small, rusted basketball hoop hung sadly from the garage. The golden child's home was a shadow of its former self. I walked up the porch and knocked on the front door. It was opened by my mother, Martha. She looked so much older than I remembered. Her hair was grayer, her face was lined with a decade of worry, and her eyes, once vibrant and full of life, were now tired and sad. "Elias," she whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. "You came? You called? I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the complex emotions swirling inside me. She pulled me into a hug, a gesture that felt both alien and strangely familiar. I didn't return it. It was a hug meant for the boy she remembered, the boy who would have run home to her. I wasn't that person anymore. Inside, the house was a mess. Papers were scattered on the floor, dishes were piled high in the sink, and the furniture was worn and old. Isabella sat on the couch, her face pale and gaunt. She looked nothing like the vibrant, carefree girl I had once known. She looked like a woman who had been through a decade of hardship, a life of unfulfilled promises and broken dreams. She looked up at me, and her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Elias," she whispered. The apology was a decade too late, a hollow gesture that felt like a final insult. My parents had made their choices. Isabella had made hers, and now they were all living with the consequences of their choices. My father, Richard, walked into the room. He was a shell of the man I remembered, his shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with a weary resignation. He looked at me, and his eyes held a flicker of the old pride, a pride that felt hollow and insincere. "Elias," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We need your help." I sat down on the couch, the worn cushions a stark contrast to the plush furniture in my own home. "I'm not here to help you," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I'm here to talk. I'm here to tell you something that I've been hiding for a decade. The truth." The words hung in the air, a final, brutal truth that they had been avoiding for a decade. My mother broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry, Elias," she sobbed. "We were so afraid of what people would say. We were so afraid of losing her that we lost you." The confession was a stunning blow. It wasn't about love or favoritism. It was about fear. They had chosen to lie because they were afraid of what people would say. Their neglect wasn't born of malice. It was born of a misguided belief that a lie was better than the truth. My parents' confession was a raw, painful admission of their guilt. They had sacrificed my life for a lie, and now that lie had destroyed them. The golden child, Isabella, was a broken woman, her life a series of unfulfilled promises and broken dreams. My parents, in their frantic need to protect her, had lost me, the son who had been forced to wear her shame. I looked at my mother, her face a mask of regret and sorrow. "I'm not here to forgive you," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm here to tell you the truth about Leo." The words hung in the air, a final, brutal truth that they had been avoiding for a decade. My mother gasped, her eyes wide with a terrified realization. "Leo, he's not your son, is he?" she whispered, her voice filled with a sense of dread. "He's Isabella's." The truth, which had been hidden for a decade, was now out in the open. Isabella, who had been a silent observer in the conversation, looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and shame. "I'm so sorry, Elias," she whispered. The apology was a decade too late, a hollow gesture that felt like a final insult. My parents, in their frantic need to protect her, had lost me. And now they were losing her too. I told them I was going to tell Leo the truth. "He deserves to know who his mother is," I said, my voice cold and hard. "He deserves to know who he is, and he deserves to know the truth." The words were a final act of defiance, a quiet act of rebellion against a family that had so profoundly betrayed me. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and I was about to confront the family that had so profoundly betrayed me. The journey home was not a return, it was a reckoning. The following day, I sat down with Leo. He was 10, a brilliant, beautiful boy who was the light of my life. I told him the truth, a story of a family's deceit, a mother's shame, and a father's love. I told him that I wasn't his father, and Isabella wasn't his sister. I told him that I was his uncle, and Isabella was his mother. He listened, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. But then he looked at me, and his eyes held a flicker of something I had never seen before: respect. "You're still my dad," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You'll always be my dad." His words were a beautiful, final vindication. I had been a boy who had been forced to wear a lie that had become my reality. And now, a decade later, I was a man who had turned that lie into a truth. I was Leo's father, his protector, his role model. I was the parent he deserved, the parent my family had denied him. My family's choices had not ruined me, they had, in a strange and painful way, set me free. And that was all the revenge I would ever need. I left town a few days later, a decade after I had been sent away. This time I left on my own terms. There was no farewell, no goodbye. I just got in my car and drove away, a man who had finally found the closure he so desperately needed. I was not a boy leaving home, I was a man returning to his life. I had faced my past, spoken my truth, and found a path forward. I had not forgiven my family, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. But I had moved past the anger and resentment. I had channeled my pain into ambition, and in doing so, I had built a life more successful and fulfilling than they could have ever imagined. My home was not my family's. My future was mine alone. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.